So we are learning qualitative and quantitative study. So what approach is your study, Dr. Leung?
Well, depends which study you talk about. For example, in the acupressure study, it is primarily quantitative. Okay, the reason it is quantitative is the fact that I would describe this as a descriptive study. I have very specific hypothesis. There's literature to support this study. Okay, and then I just need to measure those dependent variables as well as the independent variables. So it is more quantitative. On the other hand, is that you might want to design a study in using a qualitative approach. Is that you want to explore the reasons behind the relationship of the variable. That would help.
So how do you sample your population?
Well, this is a very challenging issue. To sample from the population, I have to find a representative, true representation. Okay. From the of the sample that represent the population. That is called a good sample. The literature suggests that you do random sample, okay? So that when it's random, that means it represents the population. When you look at the literature, look at the journal, how many articles actually had a random sample? Very few of them. Therefore, in most studies, we do have, we use non-random sample. Now, why you want to say it's valid? Well, then as a researcher, you have to justify why your sample is valid. So sometimes I look at the demographic variables to see whether it's parallel or similar to the population. If it is, that, for example, the average income, the average age, education, those demographic variables, they're similar to the population you want to study. Okay? In that case, I would document that even though it's not random, and it has a representation of the population. The other issue is that you do not want to study 10 subjects. Okay, the question is that what is the generalizability? Can you generalize the data that you collected and be able to draw inferences to the larger population? So to me, 10 subjects may not be sufficient. So there's something I would like to share with you called power analysis. That means how much power you have. Okay. Of the study. The higher the statistical power, the more generalizability that you might have. So this is deeper. When your instructor tell you how to do power analysis, then you might want to ask the question, what software is available, and how you're going to do it, and how much power you need in order to determine it's a good sample.
So how many people are you anticipate to participate in your study?
I would, in generally, for a quantitative study, I would say if you have involved with two variables, one independent variable, one dependent variable, minimally 30. Okay? 30. Minimally. But if you say 2, 3, 4 independent variables, now that I would defer on what statistical technique that you're going to use. Different statistical technique may have a different requirement of the sample. But in general, the principle is that the larger the sample, the better. Now, when I have to be very careful, honest with you. There's a book called How to Lie with Statistics. So when you have a sample size of 10,000, I bet most of the findings are statistically significant. Because when you increase sample size, it will automatically make the significance level easier. Okay? That means you can achieve it. So therefore, when I determine, even though it's significant 0.05, if you have a sample size of 10,000, I would be more vigorous, not to require a p equal to or less than 0.05. I would look at it deeper in terms of maybe less than 0.0001. So you have to make that determination. But in general, I would say that if you have a sample that is maybe 200, 300, 500, that would be a very good representation, assuming it can represent the population.
So how do you collect your data?
There are multiple ways to collect data. Recently, I conducted a study. I used SurveyMonkey. So it's basically you can try for free, okay? But it's limited in terms of number of responses and that can address the SurveyMonkey. But I also subscribe to them, so I just pay about $270 a year, and then I can have very good use. I think it allows me to have 1,000 subjects to respond to the SurveyMonkey for that subscription. The other thing is that I do mail questionnaire, but it costs money. Okay, SurveyMonkey does not cost much money. Okay, a mail can be expensive, right? It is roughly, if you're thinking about 50 cents each mail, give or take. Okay, 45 cents, 50 cents, plus the stationery, plus the process of putting the stamp, putting the survey in the envelope. That could be very tricky. Okay. The other way is you can do telephone survey, right? And you can call and then find out how people, whether people will be willing to participate. I get so many phone calls. I'm finally tired of it, okay? And they call me when I'm dinner time because they know you're at home. They call it dinner time, so I'm tired of it. So in general, you find it very challenging to get good response rate. You might want to do observation as well. So you could randomly select subject and make observation. So that would be another strategy. So the basic issue is that I want to ask you how much money you have. If you have a lot of money, then you might want to draw a larger sample because you can have use those resources to draw a random sample, to do some work that can include more subjects. Random sample is very expensive. My colleague, Professor Stephen Kleinberg from Rice University, he wanted to do a study for the Asian. You know how expensive it is to draw a true random sample in Houston? $250,000
wow.
for a sample of roughly about 500. So that's very expensive.
What kind of measurement do you use?
Well, I would think the measurement, the instrument has to be valid and reliable. If they are not valid or not reliable, you should not be using it. And secondly is that there are instruments that are standardized. That means they're published, their psychometric property already written, and you look at them and then before you decide to use it. Now, if there's no standardized instrument that is appropriate for you to use, you might want to create your own, but there is more work for you to use those instruments that created by yourself because you do not know the reliability, you do not know the validity of it. So you might want to think about it. First, go to standardized instrument. If there's no standardized instrument that's appropriate, then you go to your own instrument that created by yourself.
So what are some challenges to collect data?
There are a lot of challenges when you collect data. The first challenge is that the response rate. That means when you send out a survey, you only get 5% of the people responded. So that's not sufficient, okay? So how are you going to increase the response rate? So that would be something you think about. Let me give you one example, okay? I sent out a survey and then no one responded, okay? So what are you going to do? Then you need to amend your cover letter. So what I did was that I put down in my cover letter, when you participate in the survey, you are qualified. I emphasize the word qualified to have a lucky draw of lunch for two. And then when people look at lunch for two, so they are very excited, okay? But in the meantime, you're qualified, okay? Qualified doesn't mean they automatically get it, okay? So you might want to explain what does it mean. Qualified, that means you qualify in a lucky draw to get lunch for two, okay? And one study I had, I just budget $100, and I went to Chinatown, get this lunch buffet, $5 each, so $10 for two lunches. So I gave 10 prizes. So when I have 500 people who respond, when they respond, I make a lucky draw, and then to give out 10. But the thing is that you give incentive to people. People are very excited, okay? Even though it's a $5 lunch, but they're very happy when they win something, okay? So give some incentive in terms of collecting data. The second thing is that I did SurveyMonkey, okay? I send out the email link to people. But people change the mailing address, email address. So the email address may not reach them. So the challenge is that you have a lot of dropouts there because the email did not reach them. So how are you going to find out the email address that is valid? That is another challenge. The third challenge is that people receive your survey, but they are uncomfortable to respond. The reason is uncomfortable. They are uncomfortable because there are sensitive questions. I remember in 20 years ago, after I graduated from Ohio State University, they sent me an instrument asking me, how much are you making? Okay, that's fine. But I also found out that on the envelope, it has a code number. It's a 012, okay? Now, that means they know who I am. Therefore, when I fill that information, I saw that number there, they can associate my name. What year did I graduate? You are very cheap, okay? So they just find out and make me feel uncomfortable, okay? Now, I'm not cheap, okay? But anyway, I just make example. Some people can be very sensitive in this issue.